Hey everyone, Josh Veldman here, your host of the One Day or Day One podcast, the podcast where we interview individuals about their life transformation. We'll talk about where they were, where they've gone, and what it looked like along the journey. We appreciate you joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. All right, so that was a lot of really good information about your one day and soon to be, whenever that day one stops getting pushed back, right? Day one, it'll happen. You're going to be on that trip, on that journey. But I want to also talk about, so you mentioned earlier that you like to hike. Yeah. And I found this as an interesting story that you shared with me a long time ago, but you actually went on a really long hiking trip. I don't even know how to start the question here. You know what I'm talking about. So where were you hiking? How long was it? And what happened? Because there was a pretty dramatic end to that, right?
Yeah. Dramatic, middle beginning.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So yeah, in 2017, I thru hiked the whole Appalachian Trail, which goes from Georgia to Maine or Maine to Georgia, depending on the direction you hike. And it's at the time I hiked it was 2,189.5 miles.
2,000.
Yep.
Say that again.
2,189.5 was the official trail length when I hiked it.
So how many miles would you have to average a day to like get that done? What's your time frame? How long are you hoping for this to take?
When I tackled it, my goal was completion and enjoyment. It had nothing to do with the time it take.
Yeah, but if you don't have like enough going, like it's going to take you like 20 years.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right? So you had to have had some sort of a daily goal, right?
In plus or minus 5 months.
Okay.
And so if you're starting in the north, you can't start until it opens if you want to start on the mountain. And if you're starting in the south, you have to make it to the north before it closes.
Gotcha.
So typically speaking, if you're a southbounder, or they call it SOBO, you start late May, early June, when the mountain opens, and then you hike your way south, and you kind of have an open end in that direction because there's nothing down there closes unless the conditions are super terrible and they close it for safety reasons.
Sure.
They don't care if you're hiking the snow down there; it's fine. And by the time you get down to Georgia, there's not really much snow.
Right. True.
I say that, but when I went through, it was really snowy.
Oh, really? So when did you go? So it was in 2017, but when did you start? Where did you start?
Yep. So I started in Maine. So I went southbound, and I started at the beginning of June. So I think my summit date for the official start was June 4. Okay. And that's pretty typical for going southbound. You can start a little before that if the mountain opens. And you can start up to a month or two later, depending on how late in the year you want to hike. Right. And then if you're hiking northbound, usually people will start in February or March, give or take. So pretty early. Mm-hmm. And then it can be kind of snowy. If you're starting, I'd say late February to early April. April's probably a little more common because it's a little bit nicer. Mm-hmm. And it gets to be really crowded down there, though.
Yeah, I'm sure. So this is literally it's a continuous trail, though?
Yep, it's one continuous trail the whole way.
You don't have to hop over and go a mile over to get to it. It's literally continuous.
It's one continuous trail the whole way. It was set up, I think, like in the 60s or the 50s, something like that.
I mean, that's 2,000 miles.
It was the 40s. Somewhere in there. Between the 40s and 60s. I don't remember exactly. If you asked me 5 years ago, I could have told you, but
right, yeah. No,
that's okay.
Time.
But yeah, it's a single contiguous trail, the entire direction. I mean, there's a couple small sections that do follow a little bit of road walking, but generally speaking, if that's the case, it's just a diversion because they're working on the trail.
Gotcha.
But otherwise, it is a single walking trail the whole way.
Okay. So now you chose to do this alone, or did you hike it with somebody?
Yeah. So I talked to a couple of friends about potentially doing it with somebody, and I got one friend to start the trail with me. Okay. And so my dad and I and he and his dad all drove to Maine together, and we took a week with a lot of us and drove out there and spent some time just exploring Baxter State Park in Maine, which is a beautiful area. Sure. A lot of really cool nature out there. And so we went together as a group of the four of us and spent a few days just exploring the park, and then summited on the 4th And then my friend Nate and I hiked for about a week together. And our dads went home after we summited.
Okay.
They were kind of driving us out, dropping us off, and then heading back.
Yep.
And then, he hiked with me for about a week and then went home. And then after that, I was on my own.
Okay.
So for the most of it, and I say on my own, I mean, you meet people on trail and become friends.
Right.
Because you're going the same direction as a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so you'll pass people during the day, or you'll see people in camp, this same.
Right. Because there's only you have a few they're designated campsites, right? Because they've got food storage containers and stuff, right?
To some extent, designated is kind of a loose term.
Okay.
There are often designated shelters. They're called an Adirondack shelter. It's a 3-sided lean-to kind of with a raised floor. It's usually wooden. And those are positioned, I don't know, every 8 to 12 miles along large sections of the trail. Some spots, there's not so many of them.
Yep.
But for most of the AT corridor, you can also just camp wherever if you want to. But for the most part, people stick to where the shelters are because the ground's already cleared out around them. People are used to camping there, etc. Yeah. And then in places where there's high bear activity, they'll have bear boxes, which is basically a big metal box with a hard to unlatch, tamper-proof, bear-proof latch, so they don't get into it. Otherwise,
and that's what I was used to. So, because I went up to Pictured Rocks over in Mosquito Falls, Chapel Point. Is it Chapel something like that?
Yeah.
Chapel Rock.
Whatever. Yeah, there is a Chapel Rock.
Yeah, Chapel Rock. Chapel Point's the church I go to. Anyway, good plug for them, right? Anyway, so they have the bear boxes there. Yep. And in terms of camping, it's basically just a spot that's cleared out. But so what do you do for food? I went hiking and I brought Pop-Tarts and you know what I mean? What you didn't go there's not a gas station along the way or anything, is there? What do you do for food?
Sometimes there is. The nice thing about the Appalachian Trail is it's very secluded in and of itself for the most part. It follows a very green corridor all the way along the whole section. In that portion of the country, it manages to snake through a lot of primarily green. There's a couple places where it doesn't manage to do that. Like in New York, it actually goes through a zoo at one point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, believe it or not, it's kind of crazy.
Wow. Wait, it goes through New York?
Yeah.
God, I need to get better with my geography.
Yeah. So I think
because you started at Maine.
It goes through 13 states.
13 states. Well, it is 2,000 miles. So. Yeah. Okay. Literally, I drive down to Florida, and it's 1,200 miles. You're doubling that, and you're walking.
Yeah.
That's like me walking to Florida and back. It's no way. A long hike. Oh man, that's crazy. So how far did you make it?
I made it the whole way.
You did make it the whole way.
Yep.
Okay.
So to hit your point on food, though, obviously you start out with whatever you're going to when you're at Mount Katahdin in Baxter. You have to pack food for that, and then for the next section of hike, because the first section of trail after Baxter State Park is the 100-mile wilderness. And so it's just a section of trail that's 100 miles long, where there is, with the exception of one hostel that you have to take a boat to get to, there's no civilization in that section.
Okay.
And so it's a huge swath of trail that you just have to prepare for ahead of time. And usually, if you're a new hiker and hiking kind of slow, you pack 8 or 10 days worth of food just in case you kind of slow to get through that.
And you got to preserve it too. You're not eating a lot.
I mean, you're still eating a lot because you're hiking. Yeah, you're burning.
Well, I mean,
5,000 calories a day.
Right, but what? I'm just trying to think. Okay, bear with me. All right, I've the 10 miles, 12 miles I hiked, my feet hurt, and I was ready to be done for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're talking just a 100-mile strip of the woods. How much room do you have to pack? How big is your backpack if you're packing for 8 days and you're eating a lot?
I think when I started out and was doing the 100-mile wilderness, I want to say my pack was 45 pounds.
Oh,
something
man.
like that. And probably half of that, or at least a third of it, was food and water.
Right, because you got your tent too, right?
Yeah, so carrying a tent, you got generally 2 sets of clothes. You got a set of clothes to hike in, and you got camp/sleeping clothes.
And then what do you do to wash your clothes? Do you not wash them? You just let them?
You just wash them when you get to town. So you wear the same clothes.
So you're going to go through some towns then?
Oh, yeah. So
that's where I think I was like, you're going to be traveling for 5 months. What are you doing? Like killing a wild hog on the way down? Or like...
Yeah, so I would say for most of the trail, with the exception of the 100-mile wilderness, every 3 to 5 days, you're crossing some sort of main road into a town.
Okay.
So then you just get to stand on the side of the road and stick your thumb out, and somebody will hopefully pick you up and bring you to town.
Okay. Gotcha.
Or there's along the trail, there's a lot of hostels, just houses where hikers, can rent a room or just a bed in the bunk room.
Okay.
To stay at, take a shower, refuel. And so a lot of those ones will come pick hikers up at the trail, take them to the hostel, or they'll do grocery runs and take you out if you have to.
Okay.
But a lot of, for the most part, if you're going into town just to resupply, you just hitchhike your way in, go shop at our hikers' favorite places, Family Dollar or Dollar Tree.
Right.
Or not Dollar Tree,
Family
Dollar General.
Dollar General. There you go.
Dollar General is the king on the trail.
Yeah.
As far as food, just because they're everywhere and they've got pretty much everything you need to fill a hiker's bag up. So you eat a lot of pasta and tuna,
carbs.
Yep.
Gives you the energy.
And a lot of granola bars, power bars. Honestly, by the time you're halfway through the trail, the weight you're carrying doesn't really bother you. For the most part.
Oh, so it's only the first 1,000 miles.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Once you get used to it, it's not so bothersome when you start carrying more weird and random foods.
Right.
And eventually,
your legs are getting stronger too.
Your legs get stronger, and you're used to it. You're into a rhythm. It's just your day-to-day thing.
Yeah.
And you get sick of eating the same food every day, so you start making weird combinations. I think I don't know. One of the weirder things I made was a peanut butter and bacon biscuit.
Peanut butter?
Just because I had leftover stuff. We made biscuits one time when we were in town at one of the hostels, and then I had some leftover bacon from a breakfast too, and just lathered some peanut butter on it, stuck a strip right on top. It's actually pretty good.
Yeah, well.
But you start making weird combinations of whatever leftover food is in your backpack when you get close to the end of your section, looking to get into town the next time.
Yeah.
And just to break up the flavor.
You could have just eaten separate but hey, you only live once, right?
Variety of life,
there you go.
It's some spice.
So you made it through the whole 2,185 miles, correct?
Yep.
But was it all in one full swoop?
It was not.
Okay.
So
that's what we need to talk about.
Yep. I made it through all of Maine, and then ended up having to go to the hospital. How long have you been in at this point? Almost exactly a month.
Okay.
Yep.
So you're not too far into it yet.
Not super far. 1 state, 1 month.
Okay.
And it was a weird process. My whole goal of hiking the trail was to have the accomplishment and say that I hiked the trail. Mm-hmm. And it sounded like a lot of fun, and it looked really cool. And at that point, I wanted nothing more than to be able to hike the whole trail, to enjoy the whole thing, and to say I hiked the whole trail.
Yeah.
And so short of...
Not many people can say that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Roughly, I think... I was just looking at the numbers recently, and it's like... I don't know, out of the 2,000 people that start the trail every year, maybe 100 finish.
Oh, wow.
And that was 2000. I just looking at it recently. I think that was 2019's numbers. And that's starting going northbound. So you get 2,000 people starting in Georgia, going towards Maine.
Right.
And then going the other way,
which is what you did.
Which is what I did. You get maybe 100 people doing it, and then like 20 finish, something like that.
Yeah.
Huh. And I think the numbers, it's probably more like a few hundred start.
Yeah.
But most of the people start in Georgia and go north. I didn't, because I went after I graduated, and I didn't graduate until the end of April.
Gotcha.
So by that point, it was getting pretty late to be starting in the south. So I decided to start in the north.
Yep.
And do it that way. But anyways, yeah. So I'd hiked for the month, or pretty close to, and I had actually I stopped in town at a hostel, went to a restaurant, and then by the time I headed back out into the woods, I started feeling a little bit sick. Mm-hmm. or not even necessarily sick. I just kind of had a headache for a couple days. And prior to that, actually, for a little bit, I think for a few days, I just had it just felt like I had acid reflux or indigestion really bad. Mm-hmm. And then after that, the headache set in for a little while. And I just figured it was, I don't know, something, just wrote it off.
Yep.
Because I'll be fine, no big deal.
Well, I mean, you're
hiking, headache's not a big deal.
Right.
You eat weird food, you get acid reflux or indigestion, etc.
I mean, you're eating a lot of protein, and fatty stuff will give you heartburn.
Yeah.
So it's not.
And so, but it was pretty constant, and it was the first time I'd really ever had it, but still just kind of pushed it off. Figured maybe, I don't know, if it didn't go away, I'd probably go to a med center or something and see if they could figure anything out.
Yep.
I did actually stop at a med center, and I got tested for Lyme disease just in case.
Okay.
Maybe that was causing something weird.
Yep. And that was negative.
I did never call them back and I find out what the test result was. Thinking back on that, I ended up getting distracted doing other stuff, and then everything else we'll talk about ended up happening, and so I never did call them to figure out what the it had to be negative because I did get tested later and didn't have it.
Okay. Well, I can just imagine, like, we all get those phone calls like, hey, your car's extended warranty. You're like, hey, you don't have Lyme's disease, right, but you never called back.
So I had expected to hear from them at some point, and I never got a call from them or an email or whatever, and I never remembered to call them back. And by the time I remembered it, it didn't matter. It was a moot point because I'd been tested elsewhere and I didn't have it.
Yep.
So I had this headache and this indigestion, and I had the indigestion for probably at least a week because I remember going to at least one other hostel, and just being very uncomfortable. I had a really hard time sleeping in the bed, and like we'd gone out to eat, and I just wasn't hungry because it felt like I was super full and like couldn't fit more food in my stomach. Mm-hmm. And it was just a little odd, and it didn't really come to a head until I was hiking with a friend of mine who had met on trail. I think he was like a 62-year-old gentleman, an ex-Army officer. And we were kind of hiking buddies. And was hiking up a mountain with him in the rain. He was a little ways behind me. And just kind of talking to myself, because you spend a lot of time alone, you end up talking to yourself. It's just inevitable.
Sure. Yep.
And even talking to myself, I could tell my speech was a little off. And so I waited up for him, and he came up, and I said, hey, does my voice sound funny to you? I feel like I'm slurring my speech. And we talked a little bit. He said, yeah, it does sound like that. And, we were hiking in the rain, and I didn't have anything on essentially except for my rain gear because you get really hot hiking in it.
Sure.
So I didn't have like a shirt on underneath my raincoat. I think I probably had pants on underneath my rain pants, but basically nothing. And I was otherwise soaked. So we figured the most likely cause at that point was hypothermia, as it was early onset. I was starting to slur my speech from it. So I threw my hat on, threw a hood up, and decided to continue hiking forward because I think it was like 1 mile ahead, and there was a staffed campground. It was the first campground in the White Mountains in southern Maine. And the alternative was to hike 5 miles back down the trail, down the mountain, back to a parking lot where there may or may not have been people yet at that point because it was getting late in the day, and then try and hitch a ride into town or something. So I decided the better choice would be to head forward because the campground was staffed and they have radio. So if we're going to run into any real problems, they can call for help.
Right.
That'll be easier that way. And being staffed, they've already got camp set up so I can get in and get dried off and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So, put a warm hat on, trudged ahead forward, got into camp, and found the caretaker and talked to her and, said, hey, I think I've got hypothermia. My speech is slurred. Can I come in your tent, dry off, warm up, etc., and get this taken care of? And then we'll go from there. So, yep, sure thing. She brought me in. Got some warm, dry clothes on, got my sleeping bag out, put gloves and a hat on, sat in my sleeping bag. And this was the crazy part of it. For about an hour after I got settled into my sleeping bag, I went in and out of having any control of my body for it would last for probably 10 seconds, 10 or 20 seconds, where I couldn't do anything except for like sit back in the chair that I was doing. Like I couldn't move my legs or my arms or like do anything.
Wow.
For that.
That'd have been scary.
And then for about a minute or two, I'd be okay. And then it would hit again for 10 or 15 seconds. And then a minute or two, I'd be okay.
Oh, man.
And I thought it was really weird. And I was not nearly concerned as I should have been. Came to find out later how abnormal and odd that this symptom was. And so, but I did think it was really weird. So I kept notes on my phone, and I had a timer going, and I would start and stop the timer every time it would happen. So I had this time log of it happening. So it was almost exactly an hour. And after that hour, I was like 85% better. I felt fine for the most part. My speech was a bit better. And we said, all right, I'm probably okay. And so the caretaker was actually really nice. She got me like a bowl of dates and bacon and stuff to make me feel better.
Yeah. And
then just pitched camp for the night, woke up the next morning, and I was feeling probably about the same as I was, like that 85% better than I was the night before. So I got my gear on and stuff and started hiking. And before I got out of camp, I noticed a couple of things. My fine motor skills were pretty rough. I had a hard time doing minute tasks. My balance was a little bit off.
Okay.
And in and out, probably, I don't know, at this point, I don't even remember what the timing was, but we'll say, once every couple of minutes, my vision, I just wouldn't be able to focus on anything. Like it would just be kind of blurry for like 15 seconds or something like that.
And you still at this point haven't been like, something's not right.
I did think at that point that something wasn't right. I just didn't have the level of concern that I should have had.
Right. Well, I mean, you had a mission, right?
I had a mission.
Like, this could stop me from doing what I want to do.
Nothing is going to get me off trail shy of breaking my leg and physically not being able to continue doing this.
Yeah. Wow, that's determination, man.
That was kind of what's going in the back. I'm like, I can hike with a broken arm. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to finish this trail unless I physically can't walk.
Yeah.
So that was my level of determination kind of driving, behind this. So I set off on this section and was with my friend again. And we had, it was probably, I don't know, it had to be 27 miles, we'll just say.
Okay.
Left to do before we got into the next town. And then I figured at that point, I'll go to a med center, see what's going on, see if they can figure out what's up with this.
But you're feeling these issues as you're leaving camp.
Yes.
And you're like, it's 27 more miles. What is that, like a day?
2 days.
That's 2 days.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because I was pretty done after 12. Granted, you get conditioned for it and I don't, but
yeah. So at that point in the trail, I was probably averaging 12 to 15 miles a day. So the plan was to do, that section in 2 days, and we were kind of pushing ahead a little bit because this would have been the 2nd of July or the 1st of July, something like that. Because our goal was to get into town on the evening of the 3rd of July and then take a 0 day, because you hike 0 miles, a rest day on the 4th of July and have the 4th of July celebration. So we were hiking ahead trying to get into this hostel. We had reservations for the night for the 3rd and the 4th to have our 0 day and relax. So we were trying to push to get to that and figured I'll just stop at the med center after we get there and we'll still make it happen. And so conveniently, the next section of trail that we had to do after leaving that first camp in the White Mountains is the hardest section of the trail.
Oh, man. Jeez.
So there's this 1 mile, and if I remember, it's called the Mahoosic Notch, and it's the hardest mile on the Appalachian Trail because it's essentially 2 mountains that come together at the base, and then they kind of crumbled. And so it's just a huge boulder field that you have to scramble through to try and like find the trail and go under these giant rocks and over other ones. Wow. And so it's a pretty crazy section of trail. It was really fun. But it also was not fun to do in my condition.
Right.
At the same time, it was weird to do. And it was still early enough in the year. There was a lot of snow runoff. So there was all like creeks and stuff running underneath the rocks, and they get patches down there where there were, still snow left over. Mm-hmm. And it was a cool experience to go through it, but it was pretty weird and at times difficult because my balance was so off. I would run into periods of time where my legs would get stiff and tingly, like numb, like when they fall asleep on the couch or something.
Right. Yeah.
You know? And you can't really like feel them or control them. And so I'd get sections where both my legs would do that at the same time for like 30 or 60 seconds.
Oh my!
And so like the only way I can keep walking is just having my trekking poles, because then I got 4 legs, give or take, to be able to balance and move forward. And so we got through that day, and we didn't do as many miles as we planned. I think we did like 8 or 9 miles that day. Yeah. Just because that section takes so long to do. And so the next day we had like 17 miles to do. We got into camp pretty late. That campground was a campground. It's just a bunch of tent spaces in the middle of nowhere, and there's nobody there. Was super busy. It was really full, so we couldn't camp together. My friend and I, and so he went off to camp in one spot. I went to camp in another spot. We said, all right, we're going to get up on time tomorrow morning. We're going to leave at 7 a.m. or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And we're just going to hike into town together. We'll get there and we'll hike the whole thing together. And then at that point, I decided to call my parents, tell them what was going on. And
that's where it all changed.
That's where it all changed. And so,
are you dumb? Basically, you're like walking around with your paralyzed legs. Like
they were freaking out and about ready to come out and come get me.
Right.
Take me to the hospital.
You don't know where I am.
Yeah. I'm like, one more day, I'll be in the town. I'll go to a med center. It'll be fine. And they're like, no, you need to hike out and go to the ER like as soon as possible. I was like, all right. I'll go to the hospital. I'll check into the ER. We'll see what's going on. And I'll be fine. You know, I've made it this far. I can hike the other 17 miles we have left.
Yeah.
And so they were kind of freaking out. And I think at this point, it was like 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And I mentioned my fine motor skills were super off. And I had set up my phone before I left to where I could click the power button 3 times and send an SOS, just in case there were any problems. Yeah. And on top of that, I had a GPS unit that I carried with me that also served as an emergency beacon if I needed it. Well, I hung up the phone with my mom, and I went to turn my phone screen off, but my motor skills were so bad, I triple-clicked my power button.
Oh, no.
So as soon as I finished telling her about all this stuff and convincing her I didn't need to go to the ER then tonight she gets this or call emergency services, she gets it and hang up. She gets an SOS from me with it sends like a text message that says, you know, this person has sent out an SOS, and it sends them a couple of like pictures from whatever the camera can see at that point, and it sends them a little audio clip.
Yeah.
And so she calls me right back, like freaking out, like, you don't even know what you're doing. You don't know what's happening to you. You need to go to the hospital right now. I was like, all right, but so my motor skills was fine. I just tried to turn my phone off. It sent the emergency, signal. It wasn't supposed to. I'll be okay. I'll go tomorrow.
You weren't convincing anybody.
Nothing has changed. Yeah. She was not having that. So eventually convinced her and hung up the phone. Well, found out shortly thereafter that, my wife at the time, girlfriend, her poor self, she was working at a youth camp in northern Michigan at that time, and they had really poor cell service. And so I hadn't talked to her that evening, and so she didn't get anything except for the SOS, and then didn't have service, so she couldn't call anybody else to find out what's going on.
Oh, no.
So she just gets enough service to get the SOS text from me, and then can't get a hold of anybody else. So she was like freaking out and in tears because she just got this SOS and she can't get a hold of anybody. So eventually, I don't remember if she got a hold of me or my mom, and we talked about it and calmed her down, but I felt really bad for her.
Yeah,
for
that. Because that moment, I mean, and it's like you midnight. It's like nowhere can you go to get the reception, to make the call, to figure it out, and oh man, yeah, that would be a tough spot.
I felt really bad for her, and she still talks about that.
It hangs it over your head, I bet. Remember that one time you SOS'd me?
And so by this time, I think it was 1 o'clock by the time I got to bed that night. And I'm super tired from, the hike from the day. And so I set my alarm, went to bed. I didn't wake up till like 11 a.m. And I was planning on leaving at like 6 or 7 a.m. with my friend. And he couldn't find me. And so he thought I left ahead of him. And so he took off in the morning. So I didn't leave until, I don't know, probably 11:30 by the time I packed up camp, and I was by myself. And so thankfully, one of my other friends had been behind. He caught up, and I hiked probably half the day with him. And then I was hiking fast enough. I caught up with my other friend. He was surprised that I was behind him yet.
Yeah.
He was like, "Oh, I thought you were in town already." Nope, you just hanging out back at camp sleeping. Didn't know. Yeah. So anyways, hiked into the hostel, and going through my head as I'm about to do this is I'm going to go to the hostel, check in, drop off my gear, and then have them take me to the hospital. But I'm pretty certain when I get to the hospital, they're going to stick me in a bed. I'm not going to be able to move. And they're going to want me to stay there. And I'm not going to get a shower or any of this kind of stuff. So the first thing I did when I checked in, got my room, went up, dropped my bags, took a shower, got cleaned up, was hungry. And I didn't really have anything at that point much left in my bag because it was the end of the hike. And so I went back down to the kitchen, and they had a freezer with food for sale. So I grabbed an ice cream, and
why not eat ice cream? Yeah,
it sounded really good.
Yeah.
I've been hiking for a week. What am I getting?
Yeah,
ice cream's great.
Yeah.
So I'm eating this ice cream, and I walk over to the proprietor of the hostel, and I'm like, "Hey, can one of you guys drive me to the hospital? I need to go check in." And it was about 9:00 at night, I think, something like that. And he just goes, "It's like 9:00 at night. Obviously he didn't say it, but obviously I'm standing there, talking to him. Can we just take you tomorrow?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't normally talk like this." And at this point, my speech was so slurred. It sounded like I was really drunk or had a really bad speech impediment.
Right.
And so I was like, "I don't actually have a speech impediment. I don't normally talk like this. I need to go to the hospital." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds really bad. We just thought you had a speech impediment. Didn't want to say anything. We'll take you right now."
Yeah.
So they took me over to the hospital and checked into the ER. They put me in a room. And like I thought, didn't get to leave the bed for the next day.
Right.
And so I was really glad that I got that shower in.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And then, so they did, a bunch of blood draws, and this is the night of the 3rd of July. So half the staff at the hospital is off on vacation for the 4th of July. And so there's, one doctor on staff, and nothing, comes back from any of the blood tests that they were doing. And so he couldn't figure out what was going on. And at this point, my condition was relatively stable, but not worsening, but not really getting better either. So he's still pretty concerned at this point. And so just a lot going through my head that, he thought in his early diagnosis that maybe it had something to do with the altitudes of going up and down. And that, maybe I wouldn't be able to finish the rest of the trail. And so I'm freaking out that whatever this is going to stop me from finishing the hike. And then, I don't remember if it was super late. I think it was super late that night that he came back in the room and told me that they weren't equipped well enough to handle what I had going on there, and they were going to have to send me down to Boston, to Massachusetts General Hospital. And so the next morning, they were going to have an ambulance
Was
come.
that close by, or?
No, that's like a 10-hour drive away.
Wow. Okay.
By ambulance.
So they drove you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they picked me up early the next morning, an ambulance.
So hold on.
A gurney in the back.
Hold on. I got to stop you here a second. So when they tell you that, what is the first thing that goes through your mind? What's wrong with me? What?
Just
right? I mean,
bewilderment. I have no idea what's going on. Whatever this is really weird. But through the whole thing, I just had, I don't know, this piece about me that, whatever it is, other than the fact that I was really upset that I might not be able to get to finish the trail.
Right.
And very sad about that part, and kind of a little heartbroken about that. But other than that, just kind of at peace that, whatever happened, God's got me.
Right.
And if something's going to happen, it's going to happen. And if it's not, it's not. And there's nothing I can do about it.
Right.
And so I honestly had a lot of peace about it. I wasn't really freaking out about it at all. Just really sad that I might not be able to get to finish the trail.
Right.
And so they picked me up early the next morning in the ambulance, and I got in, and it was a really nice gentleman and a lady that, younger, not a lot older than I was. And I said, "Hey, I've been talking to my parents, they live in Michigan. It's an 18-hour drive for them to get from there to here, and they're going to have to come here pick up all my gear from the hostel, and then drive down to Boston after that. Can we like swing by the hostel and pick up my backpack and stuff? And they're like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. Like, oh, sweet.
Saves them.
So yeah, convince the ambulance drivers to go to the hostel and let me pick up my stuff. So we drove there. I got out of the back and went, got all my gear and stuff, talked to my friends that were there. And so that was a really unexpected experience to have them make that pit stop and be able to do that. And so then I got to call my parents and tell them they didn't have to, come up here first to get all my gear.
Right.
And then, I went down to Massachusetts General Hospital on the 4th of July and, spent the 4th of July and the rest of the week just in a hospital bed for the most part. Cause I couldn't really walk on my own.
Right.
Without trekking poles. Just like,
cause your legs were still doing that numb thing, but were they probably worse by that point?
My balance was so off and it was, so bad. I couldn't do more than hobble without them.
Wow.
Yeah, but walk on assisted.
And the crazy thing is that you hiked so many miles like that too.
Yeah, like 30 miles.
That's insane, man. Like, I'm just telling you, like, again, I think back to the 12 miles I did and I was exhausted at the end of it.
Yeah.
Like, to hobble through that, like...
My feet hurt, but...
Well, yeah, but everything else, I mean, nothing was working,
Nothing was working the way it was supposed to. Yeah, my vision was occasionally off. My speech sounded like I was drunk or had a really bad speech impediment. My balance was very poor. My legs would, I always described it like I felt like they had like cerebral palsy, where they wouldn't really do what you want them to, and they were quite stiff and tingly. My fine motor control was really poor. The weirdest and the most annoying part, honestly, was my lack of vocabulary. And like, that's the most surprising thing. Like, you wouldn't think about it, but whatever it was with that, put enough pressure on my brain or change the composition or whatever, I could not use more than very basic words to talk. That was the weirdest and the hardest thing about it. So I just had to think of very easy to use sentences using super basic English to try and convey what I was talking about, because I couldn't use like a normal speech pattern. I couldn't talk normally. It was weird. And that was one of the craziest things, because like in high school, I was kind of a nerd and would play games with my friends, just using a thesaurus. So like we'd all like pick a random word, a word out of the thesaurus, and everybody would have to like make up a definition of it. And then you'd have to like go through and pick which was the correct definition, kind of thing. Yeah. So I used to play word games like that. Yeah. So I knew a lot of random words, and one of my, hobbies or pastimes or whatever, I just really like to know what specific words were for a certain situation. So there's a lot of words in the English vocabulary that don't get used, right, that mean very specific things in certain situations. And I really appreciated the nuances of that. Yeah. So I knew a lot of random words like that. So it was really, really hard, to not be able to use anything but super basic speech in like really basic
because
speech.
You just can't find it, right? Like you know it, but you know,
but like I know there's something. I had to intentionally dumb down what I was trying to say or communicate across without, like, I knew I was having to dumb it down, but I didn't know what I was dumbing it down from.
Right.
Like, it was really weird. That was the craziest thing.
So they get you down to Boston. Now what?
Like, so they checked me in, and I had a whole slew of doctors from the neurology department and from the infectious diseases, trying to figure out what's going on.
So you're a lab rat at this point.
I was. I think there was like 6 or 8 doctors around me at various times, like different doctors. It was crazy. And I remember spending a lot of time just sitting in ER until they kind of figured out that I didn't have some sort of infectious disease I could give to everybody else in the hospital. And then, they did a lot of blood draws. They did some MRIs, like CAT scans. They did, at one point, they did a spinal tap, like everything they could think of. And they spent about 4 days trying to figure out what was going on. And by the end of the 4th day, my symptoms were starting to get better, and they still hadn't figured it out. And eventually it got to the point where they couldn't figure out what was going on. Like when I first checked in, they started treating me right away for, I think, malaria and Lyme disease, because those are two options that can cause swelling of the brain, which they figured out is what I had. My brain.
So there was
swelled.
something going on with the brain.
Yep.
Which makes sense because that triggers everything else in your body.
That's your central control center, and which is kind of what I figured what was going on thinking about it. And I thought maybe I had malaria or something like that, because based on the symptoms that were exhibiting, it was my whole body. It was everything. I couldn't talk well. I figured it had to be brain swelling or something like that. And it turned out that's what it was. And so they started treating me for malaria and for Lyme's disease. And then eventually they just stopped giving medication for that after they ruled it out, just so they could get ahead of it. And after the 4 days, they couldn't figure out what it was. Then they sent my samples off to some labs to do research on, and just signed some paperwork for waiver for research, becoming a lab rat.
Right. Yeah.
And then essentially at the end of it, they said, we don't know what's going on. Our best working theory is at the point where everything started, probably shortly after I was in that town, is I picked up some sort of infection or disease or something that my immune system fought off, and then for whatever reason turned on my brain and attacked my brain. Huh. So they think that the swelling was caused by some sort of internal immune attack of my body turning on itself.
Wow.
But by the end of the week, I was starting to recover and get better, and they said basically just go home. You're in recovery. There's nothing else we can do for you because we don't know what's happening, other than we know you're getting better, and you'll get better eventually. Maybe a week, maybe a month, maybe a year. We don't really know, but there's nothing else we can do for you. So go home.
Yep. So
they sent me home. I spent I think the next day touring Boston with my parents who had come down to be with me. I think they came down. I think either the same day or the next day after I got to Boston, and stayed at the hospital with me. So they took me home, and then for the next month, 3 weeks, it took me about 3 weeks until I could walk again on my own normally. And I think it was about a week until I could walk without support or assistance, and then a couple weeks after that till I was walking pretty slower but normal.
Yep.
And at that point, I got the clear from my doctor that I could go back to the trail.
Okay.
Because I said, hey, I can walk again. I don't need to be able to talk. I can go hike.
Yeah.
And I was ready to go back again. And my grandma was not happy about that. She thought I needed to stay home and recover more. So after I got the okay from my doctor, I talked to her about it, and she actually took me for a hike to make sure I could hike well enough before I could go back to the trail. Where
you were good?
She happy with that. So we went on a little hike together, and talked the whole time, and I was hiking fine enough that she was okay with me going again. So I went back to the trail, and I think I got back August 6th. So it's almost exactly 1 month that I was off trail. From July 4 to August 6. And then my mom and my girlfriend, now wife, came back with me. We did some sightseeing on the way out there, drove up Mount Washington and went to see some waterfalls and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Cool things for them. They dropped me back off at the same hostel that I was at. And, I found my shoes. So super random. I had left my shoes at the hostel when I went to the hospital, because I put on my camp, I had Crocs on my backpack, because you get really sick of wearing the same shoes you're hiking all day. Your feet get
Crocs,
sore.
You air your feet out.
You want to air your feet out. They can breathe. So I wore my Crocs to the hospital, left my hiking shoes at the hostel, got back to the hostel a month later, and they were still there.
That's funny. They're like, we ain't touching them, all right? We're not going to country mouth.
They just have this shoe rack where everybody puts their shoes, and I guess nobody had noticed that they were sitting there for that long. They had little spider webs on them.
That's funny.
And so, that was the funniest thing. I got back and my shoes were still there. So I sent my shoes back home to my family because I bought new ones at that point.
Right.
Because I needed something to hike, and I realized I'd left them. They dropped me back off, and it took me a little while to get back in the swing of things. I'd lost, some of the fitness that I'd had and the endurance.
Yep.
But the nice thing about it is I gave my feet a month break.
Right.
And so for the first month, like your feet get really, really sore hiking on them. And a lot of people end up with like permanent foot problems just because they
I can believe it,
beat them so hard. A lot of people also their feet will flatten out. Some will like go up a half a shoe size or a shoe size or something like that.
Right.
And so I think the month off really helped me because after that month off, and it was maybe, a week or two break-in period, my feet were pretty much fine the rest of the trail.
Gotcha.
So that was really good. I think that was a big contributor that I beat them up really bad and then let them heal and then went back again.
Then at that point they were stronger and could handle it probably. Yeah.
I think that was really good. And so honestly, the next section of trail was probably the hardest for me because I was so lonely.
Right. Because your other friends they're a month down now.
Yep. Exactly. And so by the point of getting off the trail, I'd met up with so many people, and you kind of make a trail family.
Yep.
And you get pretty close with your friends, and you're seeing them every day or every other day, something like that, depending on your hiking cadence with them. And then by the time I came back to the trail, everybody was a month ahead of me, and so I was all by myself. Mm-hmm. And didn't know anybody. And at this point, a lot of they call it the bubble, where the majority of people are hiking, was shifted ahead of me. I was at the back of the bubble. So there wasn't nearly as many people on or around the trail going the same direction as I was. As opposed to when I started, there was tons of people. Mm-hmm. You have 10 or 15 people in camp every night. Right. A lot of them are new and same. By the time I finished a month off and came back, it was down to 1 to 6 people a night or something like that, give or take.
Right.
And it was
not all the
different people, and they're not all of them are through hikers. Some of them are just hiking temporarily, or their pace is way different, or you just don't get along well with them.
Yep.
And so the pool to find friends is much, much smaller. And so I really struggled with loneliness for the next month until I met up with some new people and made friends. And that was the hardest part of the trail. And other than the medical stuff forcing me off the trail, was the only time on the trail where I ever considered quitting.
Right.
And even then, obviously I didn't, and I wouldn't have quit. But it was definitely something that I thought about because it was so lonely and pretty terrible.
Yeah.
So that was the hardest part of the trail, not the whole going through the hospital thing. It was the loneliness after coming back and being by myself.
How long total after you started back again until you finished?
About 4.5 months.
Okay.
Yep. So the whole ordeal altogether was about 6.5 months, and then a month off. So about 5.5 months of actual hiking.
Okay.
It took me from start to finish.
Wow, that's crazy.
So now I feel time.
So you in a short amount of time, you have made me realize how boring of a life I have. I mean, I don't go anywhere. I've, born and raised in Huntsville. I haven't lived anywhere else. And you've literally lived for 5.5 months on a trail.
Oh, it was so fun. And I would do it again in a heartbeat.
Would your wife go with you right now?
She probably would. We've talked about there's 3 main long trails in the United States. There's the Appalachian Trail, there's the Continental Divide Trail, which runs up to Continental Divide, and there's the Pacific Crest Trail, which is out west and goes through the Rockies. And we've actually talked about at some point in our lives doing one of the other trails together, or potentially I would do the Appalachian Trail again, and I would like to do it northbound.
Gotcha. Go the other
just
direction.
Do it in the other direction.
Yeah.
But there's so much else to see. I would love to do the other ones also. So the odds of doing the Appalachian Trail again are kind of probably lower than if I were to switch and do like the Pacific Crest Trail.
Right.
Do the next one.
Well, and you think about like in life, the timing of when you have available to do this, right? I mean, so you did it right after you graduated high school.
It's a big block of time.
Well, say that again.
It's a big block of time that you have to carve out to be able to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't feel like you have a big block of time necessarily in life where it makes sense to do it.
Right.
Because when you get out of high school, you don't have to jump straight into a career. Mm-hmm. If you want to go to college, great. But like, you don't have a whole lot of expenses. So going for 5.5 months and living off of that is probably not too hard to do.
Yeah.
But if you like at my point, you're not working. Well, now I have a mortgage. I've got kids and a wife, and
there's a lot of other distractions and expenses. And
Right. The only other time would be later on in life, but then now you're older, and can your body handle it?
Right.
I can tell you right now, I wake up I'm 32. I wake up feeling like the guy that's 62 is way better shape than me.
Yeah. There's a definite skewing towards the hikers being younger, either fresh out of high school or more popular, fresh out of college or in college, and older people who are retirement age and beyond. Yeah. You can do it in less time. If you're hiking more miles, you can do it in 4 months. There's guys that do it in 1 to 3 months that are trail runners, and they'll run the whole thing.
Yeah, that sounds
sounds terrible, and it
sounded awful to start with.
Not a hiking experience,
and then that made it sound even worse.
Yeah. So I think the record is something closer to like a month or 2 months. I don't remember.
Wow, really? They could do the whole Appalachian Trail in a month?
Yeah, I'll look it up.
Yeah, Google that.
All right, 2011 was completed in 46 days, 11 hours, and 20 minutes. So just under 2 months, a month and a half.
Wow. So do me a favor.
And that's the record. So doing it very quickly
46
is in
but
3
that's
months.
2,185 miles. Divide that by 46.
Yep, 2,100.
46 and a half.
I'll do
whatever.
190 because that's what it is, roughly. Divided by 6.5.
190. What are you talking about? Oh, 2190.
Yeah, 2,100. It was 89.5 when I did it.
Gotcha.
Now they say it's 2,190 or 2,200 plus or minus.
Okay. Divide that by however many days.
Oh, by 45. By 45 would be 48 miles a day.
48 miles a day.
Yeah.
I don't even drive that many in a day.
It's insane.
Wow.
Those guys, and the guys that are doing that are doing it for a speed record. And they've got a support team that
is on the
takes
trail,
their gear
right
from one end to the other. They've got like a support car that comes around.
So they're not carrying their own stuff.
They'll carry, I think, probably to, they've got to carry some basics. Like they got to carry their own camp stuff and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But they can get food like at drops and stuff from the support team.
Gotcha. Wow.
So, and my goal was to complete it, not to do it fast.
Yeah.
I wanted to enjoy every bit of it that I could and see all the things and do all the things. So I didn't set an end goal for as far as a date. I just figured I'll finish when I finish.
Yeah.
And I did 5.5.
So what's that moment like when you actually, like when you get to the very end of the trail? Like, is it like a big hurrah, or is it just like, well, that's it?
So I finished the trail with, I think, 3 other friends of ours.
Okay.
Three friends of mine. So it was 4 of us that finished together.
Oh, so you had like people from home?
No, friends that I met on the trail.
From the trail.
Yeah, trail
Okay.
family. Hiked the last bit of trail together up to the finish line. And then my parents met us there. And I think one of the girls I was hiking with, her dad met her there.
Okay.
And so they came with us, and like we brought, little champagne bottles and had a little party at the top.
Gotcha.
For a little celebration. And then at the end of the trail on the south side, it finishes on a mountain called Springer Mountain. Mm-hmm. And that's the official end of the trail, is at the peak of the mountain. And then there's a road that goes up there, and there's a 10-mile, they call it approach trail, from there down to Amicalola Falls.
So even
Lodge.
when you're done, you're not done.
Unless you take a car. And so everybody that I'd hiked, finished with at that point, decided that they were done at the peak, and they were rode back with the parents and stuff. And so I wanted to do the approach trail to finish it off. Some people consider it part of the trail, some don't. The thing on the trail is hike your own hike.
Yeah.
Do what you want. You're your own moderator. But I wanted to do it and have that as part of it for the completion. So I actually jogged that section.
Oh my goodness.
And so I got back to the lodge about the same time that they got back with the car for that like 10-mile section drive.
That's crazy.
And so that was the cool feeling. To be done with that, to me, was being done with the whole trail, because I'd finished all of it that there was to do.
Right.
End to end. And at the end of all of that is a crazy mixture of emotion between happiness for everything that you've done and got to see and experience, and depression in not having that anymore. It's a big loss at the very end, because this thing you've spent every waking moment on for the last 6 months, is your whole life is over with. It's accomplished, which is an amazing feeling. But at the same time, it's a big sadness because you're not with those friends and family anymore, that the family you've made on the trail. You're not in that same routine that you've been in for the last 6 months, and it becomes very ingrained after that much time doing it every day. So it took a little while to settle back down emotionally and get back into the rhythm of being home and living a normal life again, as opposed to, you get up and your whole purpose in your day is just to walk and to see what's next on the trail and to accomplish a very visible and very attainable goal of making the number of miles to get to the next, campsite and see the sights and things, to a very differently structured life with very different goals, or when you first get back, no goals.
Right.
You go from having a single driving purpose in life and pushing everything you have towards that to accomplish it, and to finish this race,
which not a lot of people do. Like you're one of very few people that actually do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you say it's like 200 or something that finish, but like, I don't know if you know, but like there's like millions of people in America. So that's a pretty,
that's
pretty small.
And you run into stuff like there's a section in New York where you hike through an old zoo that's still operational. That surprised me. I didn't realize.
Did you have to pay to get through that part of the?
Nope, it's free.
Okay.
So it's a free zoo, and it was probably made in the 60s or something like that, but it's still operational. And for probably the first 3/4 of the trail, that was the only bear that I saw.
Oh, really?
In that zoo.
And you're probably like, I'm fine with that.
That's that's okay. And then,
did you carry?
Nope, I did not.
Really?
Yep. No. So
are you not allowed to, or
there are huge sections of the trail we're not allowed to.
See, that surprises me.
So
because
through states like New York, like unless you have a pistol license in New York, you just can't possess a pistol in New York.
Right.
Period. And so there's large sections like that. Plus, throughout the trail, you go through a lot of national park sections, and so you end up in federal buildings as a result of that. You can't carry in federal buildings.
Right. And it's not like you don't have a car to leave it in. So
correct. It's in your backpack. You can't really leave that outside by itself. So technically, you wouldn't be able to go into an outhouse in a national park.
Right.
Because it's officially a federal building.
Right.
So there's things like that, but there's quite a few states in the New England area that have similar laws to New York that are very restricted as far as carrying.
Yeah.
So that wasn't a thing. And on top of that, the trail is pretty safe. I think there's maybe in the news, there's been a couple murders on the trail, in the last decade, but the number of people on the trail versus the number of people that get hurt or assaulted is super skewed to being very safe.
Yeah.
So I felt safe the whole time.
Just only a couple murders on the trail. That's
I mean,
careful who you friend yourself.
How many murders are in, whatever
Chicago,
Chicago every day, or Grand Rapids,
right.
or Hudsonville, Jenison, Holland, whatever. That there's a lot of more of that kind of thing that happens in town close to us than what can be on the trail.
Good stuff. All right. Well, I think I'll wrap it with that. So, hey, thank you so much. If you're still listening to this, we appreciate your support. Be sure to continue to tune in, as we'll have more guests on the show talking about what their what their one day or day one is. And I have to say, this was a good one. You've got something coming up, and you've had a great experience. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. Can't wait to have the next one. See ya.